And we're live with another podcast. I'm Mike, and here always with Mitch.
Right over here.
I guess we can start off by talking about more Karlsson rumors.
Yeah, Erik Karlsson. It is being rumored that in the past 24 hours, I feel like every 24 hours we hear that in the past 24 hours, things have started to heat up.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, when you talk about Erik Karlsson, you also talk about Bobby Ryan.
Yeah.
The Senators have long been rumored to want to include him in a package. It's been reported that that's not necessarily a must, but it's something that the Senators, obviously a team who they have money troubles with Eugene Melnyk as their owner. So any way to get rid of some cash, they're going to do. So any deal involving Erik Karlsson, there's a good chance Bobby Ryan's tied on to it.
And Bobby Ryan obviously hasn't really worked out since really leaving Anaheim. So
he signed that giant contract. I mean, if you look at it right now, he's still got 4 years left at $7.25 million. And at this point in his career, Bobby Ryan he's still a decent enough player. I think people forget that he's still a middle six, maybe even a second.
He's not
going to
be that top line guy that he was in Anaheim.
But he's obviously being a middle six guy, middle six winger. He's not worth his contract.
No,
he's obviously
not.
has not lived up to that contract that he signed with the Ottawa Senators. But he's still a guy. He's still someone
he's still somebody depth wise could help. But
he had about a half a point per game last season.
Yeah.
He's been injured the past couple of years. Only played 62 games the past 2 seasons.
He did pretty good in the playoffs.
Yeah, when he was in the playoffs a couple of years ago, he was great. He was one of the Senators' best players. He's one of the reasons.
But that was really the only time when he was in Ottawa where he played really well and everything.
Yeah, and he had a lot more ice time. Than they put him back in the top 6. So
But Ottawa's also that team that they're going to want to have a lot in return because there's just a lot that's happened just this offseason and this season alone that's gone down for them. Yeah,
the Senators are in a tough situation right now, and you look at the money troubles that Eugene Melnyk's had, along with obviously the Mike Hoffman situation and their wives, the problems they've had there, and having to trade Hoffman for essentially nothing.
Yeah. And then having him in your division.
Yeah, after being traded by the Sharks for more than they got in return. The Senators are a mess at the moment, and Erik Karlsson, it sounds like he's very likely to move. Some teams rumored to be interested, including the two that are most reported, as I think we mentioned yesterday, were Tampa Bay and Vegas. Also mentioned have been the San Jose Sharks, potentially. Obviously, they're a team who was interested in John Tavares, reportedly offering him as much as $13 million a year. That's $2 million more than he signed for with the Maple Leafs. So they're a team who, you look at them and they are an older team. Their biggest guys are in the tail end of their prime, so obviously they see their cup contention window shrinking a bit. So they want in those final few years that a guy like Joe Pavelski or Logan Couture, Brent Burns, those guys who they have maybe
Martin Jones,
maybe only 2 or 3 years left in their prime. They want those years firmly in contention, and Erik Karlsson obviously would make one of the, if not the favorite to win the Stanley Cup, especially to at least come out of the Western Conference.
They just signed Hurdle last night to a 4-year deal too.
Yeah, so they're spending money. Outside of San Jose, Vegas, and Tampa, like you mentioned, the Rangers were rumored to be interested,
but now they're kind of out of contention, right?
It sounds like maybe they're falling out of contention there. I'm not sure if that it's come out over the past 24 hours that the Senators have allowed Erik Karlsson to negotiate a contract with the team that could potentially trade for him. That would obviously increase the return the Senators would get, along with the fact that it would be much more valuable for the team receiving him, because they would know that it wouldn't just be a 1-year rental. And obviously that would be what the Senators would want the most, like I just said, getting the most in return. So you'd look at teams who have a lot of cap space. So that does tend to
good cap space and a pretty decent prospect pool, so you can get something for your future.
Yeah, so there are definitely only a few teams who could possibly do that.
Yeah, because that fall of Ottawa is just weird. Just in overtime in Game 7, the Eastern Conference to
a goal away from the Stanley Cup, and or going to play for the Stanley Cup, and now they are the second worst team in the NHL last year, and about to lose by far their best player, their franchise player, their captain.
Wasn't even reported that Craig Anderson was demanding a trade too, or something.
Craig Anderson is available. That's pretty much all we've heard about that. I haven't seen any other reports.
Really reported that, but
other than Craig Anderson's available, I believe he might have even asked for a trade. But outside of that, I haven't even really heard specific teams interested in Anderson.
Because he's a little older, so I don't know how teams would feel about that.
And obviously, we mentioned the teams that would need. What the teams that could potentially trade for Karlsson would need.
Yeah.
They would need to have a lot of cap space. They would need to have a very good prospect pool. They would need to be a team that Karlsson would be interested in signing, and a team that with him would be contending for a Stanley Cup. And I think people have started to notice, and there was even an article posted to NBC Sports listing 5 potential landing spots, all speculative. They didn't have any inside information, but teams that from the outside looking in look like they could, they would be a good fit. And the Flyers were one of those 5 teams listed, and it makes sense.
It does.
Just from that perspective.
They have one of the best prospect systems. They have the money to spend, and they would automatically make him a contender if they were able to sign him.
Exactly.
Or trade for him.
The Flyers, at this very moment, after signing James Van Riemsdyk, have $14.74 million in cap space. So, I mean, right now, if you look at Erik Karlsson, like I mentioned before,
and if you believe what Hextall said in his post-game or his interview after
his press conference,
that he's not really willing to look at signing anyone else, then
and you look at the fact that he said, and people were down on him potentially not even wanting John Tavares because at the end of the season, he said that he wasn't really looking to give anyone a long-term contract, a good player a long-term contract, but he even said that he was interested in Tavares and that he really meant that a good player he would not offer a long-term contract, but a truly great player he would obviously be interested in offering a long-term contract. So I think it's at least something that Ron Hextall should and maybe even will
at least
look into.
Yeah, at least to see what the return would be or what could possibly be.
Yeah, and if Karlsson would even be interested in signing an extension. It's one of those things where I think that maybe if Karlsson isn't interested at all in a sign and trade, then the Flyers probably aren't interested. No. Hextall has said he's not interested in a one-year guy. But if he is interested in signing with the Flyers, I think it's something Ron Hextall has to consider, and he is the best defenseman in the NHL, at least in my opinion. So it's something you have to look into.
Yeah, you do.
And looking at obviously Bobby Ryan, if he was included in the deal, that might be a bit of a problem from the Flyers' perspective, unless they held some money in at the Senators, unless they took back some of that salary, but they were saying space.
Before, like the other day, that there were some teams that they offered Bobby Ryan and other teams that were offering, but they don't want Bobby Ryan.
Yeah, so Bobby Ryan doesn't necessarily have to be involved. They could also do a 3-team trade where Bobby Ryan is included on another team. So there are other ways to navigate.
Kind of like how Ryan Reeves ended up in Vegas.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways where this could be navigated, where Erik Karlsson could potentially be on the Flyers. Obviously, this isn't us saying that's likely.
That's probably not going to happen.
It's almost definitely not going to happen.
He fits the Flyers for what they want. If he would be a great first pair defenseman with Provorov.
He's right-handed. It's something Ron Hextall has said that he
wants.
And
he's got the ability to pretty much have the pressure on his shoulders and able to do well under it, considering he brought Ottawa to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Final on one leg.
On one leg, yeah, with a torn Achilles, he carried that team. And it's something that's mind-blowing when you look at their cap-friendly page, like I am right now. Bobby Ryan, as I mentioned before, $7.25 million for the next 4 years. Erik Karlsson only has 1 year left on his deal, but $6.5 million. So he has almost $1 million less per year on his contract than Bobby Ryan. 6.5. It's a bargain deal for Karlsson. Obviously, that's only one more season. So after that, he's going to be making.
And that's obviously. I think more teams would be interested. I think the reason why they did this way for having teams do the offer sheet is because they probably weren't nobody else probably was similar in thinking of Hextall and wanting to do more, or not just have a 1 year thing.
Yeah,
because there was no guarantee that he would sign back with them.
Exactly.
And they don't want to give up a whole bunch of great prospects just for this one guy for 1 year.
Exactly. You can't mortgage your future on a guy who you don't even know if they're going to stay longer than this season. That definitely plays a part in it. And that's why a lot of people were saying prior to this revelation that potentially there could be a sign and trade, that maybe the Senators wouldn't get as much as a guy of Erik Karlsson's caliber really should return.
Yeah.
Without that contract, but looking at that now, it could be anything. It could be a large amount. I mean, if I were to try to, if the Flyers somehow managed to sign Erik Karlsson and trade for him, and at the moment it's been reported that the Senators offered him an 8-year contract for $10 million a year. That's $1 million a year less than what Drew Doughty signed for recently with the Los Angeles Kings. So Karlsson, it hasn't exactly been reported, but it's fairly obvious with them still trying to trade him that's not good enough for him. He wants it. I would assume he wants at least what Drew Doughty got, $11 million a year.
Because he's just as good, if not better, than Drew Doughty is.
Yes, so
it would make sense for him to want something similar to what you got.
Without a doubt. And it wouldn't surprise me if he wants a little bit
more.
And
he deserves that for what he's able to provide for your team.
Definitely. But if you were to try to make a trade, a Flyers-Senators trade in which the Flyers had Karlsson signed for 8 years, I think it would be a lot.
Yeah.
And I think their first ask would obviously be young roster guys, so I think they'd be very interested in a guy like Nolan Patrick or a guy like Ivan Provorov. The Flyers, I think if this came to fruition, that these two teams negotiated, I would assume that the Flyers would say Provorov, Patrick, Carter Hart off the table completely.
Yeah, no.
Other guys, a guy like Shane Gostisbehere, if he was included in the deal, there would not be much else in the deal. But I wouldn't think that he would be completely off the table. I would assume that a deal would have to be around one of those, a guy like Gostisbehere, a guy like Travis Konechny.
And Simmons isn't good enough, I would say. Return for Ottawa, just do a one-on-one switch.
I've seen people make proposals, and I just don't see Wayne Simmons as a guy that the Senators would even really value too highly, just because he's 30 years old, or he's entering his 30s, and the Senators are obviously at a spot where, as Michael hits his hand on the table, they're in a spot right now where they're rebuilding, and they have a long ways to go before they are a contender. So I don't think that Wayne Simmons is someone that they necessarily would want. So I think it would probably, and along with a guy, I think it would potentially, if you were to make this deal, a guy like Travis Konechny as that young roster guy, along with Travis Sanheim. And I think you would also have to include Philippe Myers probably also. Maybe. I mean, this is, I would look at it as trading essentially Sanheim for Karlsson as you're replacing in your lineup. Instead of Sanheim being in your lineup, it's Karlsson. Obviously, it's a big upgrade. You're also adding in Philippe Myers as another defenseman, another young defenseman that the Senators would acquire.
Yeah, but that'd be one of those things where fans wouldn't like, because you're just for this one guy, you're giving away some of your great prospects and everything.
Oh yeah,
but at the same time, the person you're getting in return is one of the best defensemen in the league,
and would make this team a true Stanley Cup contender. Yeah. And
it's essentially back from, if you want, not that they're similar players, but back when we had Pronger.
Yeah, exactly, and it's an even bigger deal for the Flyers if they were to acquire a guy like Erik Karlsson, because Chris Pronger, when the Flyers got him, was 35 years old. Erik Karlsson is 27.
He still helped.
28 years old.
He still helped them in 2010 to bring him to the Stanley Cup. So.
Exactly, and this would be a much longer term project, a much longer term deal. Is someone you would be on your team for that length of that contract, an 8-year contract. So, yeah, I think that it would be something like that, and then adding a large number of picks. And is it something I think Ron Hextall would consider? I would hope that he would at least check in on it. I don't know if it's something he would really do. I very much doubt it. From what's been reported, it sounds like Vegas.
It's probably going to be similar to when there was rumored that the Flyers were interested in Ryan O'Reilly. He probably said, "What do you want?" And they said what they wanted. It was too high for him, so he backed off.
Yeah, I think it could be a very similar situation. Obviously, again, there hasn't necessarily the Flyers haven't even really been connected with the Senators in terms of.
It was just a rumor from.
It was
this.
It was just it wasn't even necessarily a rumor. It was just a speculative this makes sense. Sort of
exactly.
So it probably won't happen, but it's fun to at least talk about. And move on to some more Flyers related talk, something a little more realistic.
Development camp just wrapped up. Was it yesterday or today?
Yesterday was the last day. It was a 3-on-3 tournament, and neither of us were there.
Obviously, yeah.
So
all that we really heard from it was just pretty much what was tweeted out from people who were there and everything. So
yeah, a lot of the top guys sounded like they did well. It seems like that seems to be the case every year. But
the guys who expect them to do well did well. I think the big standout was how much Morgan Frost built up, and since his draft year. Yeah,
it's Morgan Frost, Ron Hextall, whenever he's talked about him, whenever you've heard anyone in the Flyers front office talk about Morgan Frost and his ability to potentially make it to the NHL, it's always been about adding size. He's a guy who, at 5'11", he's not that short. He's not someone who that will be a problem with him in the NHL, but he's a skinnier guy. He's someone who needed to pack on some weight. And it sounds like he's done that.
Yeah, he's the same size as height-wise as Drew.
Yeah, so height-wise, it's not necessarily a problem, but Morgan Frost said that he has gained 10 pounds. I believe he said he's 184 pounds coming into development camp. Obviously,
Drew's only a pound heavier than that at 185.
Yeah, so he's someone who.
So that's
at that weight.
If you want, not like comparing that, he'd be like Drew in his career, but. Drew's had success. He put up 100 points this last season.
Yeah.
Short people have been known to do well in the league. It's
at 184, and obviously that's just his off-season weight. Guys lose a lot of weight going into the season when they skate so much, and when they're actually in full contact and skating, they tend to lose a lot of weight. As I think Frost even said that right now he's at 184, but he'll probably be in the 170s at the moment if he was really truly mid-season. And that goes to the same from before. He was 174 before, and he was probably playing in the 160s once the season started. So he's someone. Ron Hextall has said that he still believes that Frost needs to pack on some more weight, and obviously that will help him. But
I mean, especially for a center, you want him to tack on more weight because there's so much more that they have to do compared to a winger. So that makes sense for him to bulk up.
Yeah, if you look around the league at players who are known for being more slight of frame, you think of your Johnny Gaudreaus, you think of your Mitch Marners. They're wingers.
Yeah.
And so as a center, it is more important for him to pack on more weight, but. At this point, at least he's shown that he is able to do that. There are some guys who really struggle with that, and obviously it's something that he's proven he can do. So I'd maybe not make it to the NHL this year. Obviously, there's a spot that he can fight for. But
kind of brushed on this yesterday, but Morgan Frost could be one of those guys that Hextall said. It's not likely, but he has a possibility of making the team.
Yeah, if he plays as well as he is able to, if he can play as well as possible, he could steal a spot in camp. He could be that third line center. And I was thinking maybe we could maybe rank our prospects just because we weren't necessarily at development camp, but
just going forward and everything.
Yeah. So who do you think is the Flyers' top prospect?
Right now,
outside of the NHL, I wouldn't count like a Travis Sanheim, but
like an Oscar Lindblom who's had
I think some people have counted him because he didn't play that many games, but I
or even Travis Sanheim, guys who actually like kind of graduated. But I would say probably obviously people would say Carter Hart as an obvious one. Myers is obviously high up there now. Frost, another player.
Yeah, I think it seems to be the consensus if you look at prospect rankings that people have done for the Flyers that Carter Hart seems to be the number one universally, and he's if he can reach his potential and be that franchise goaltender, obviously that potential is higher than any other prospect the Flyers have. I mean, even if you look at a guy like Philippe Myers, Morgan Frost, I don't know if either of them really have the potential to be a number one defenseman or a number one centerman in the NHL, but Carter Hart has franchise player, goaltender potential.
But his thing is it's going to take him longer to be able to do that.
Exactly. And even if everyone has seemed to have jumped on.
I mean, he's 19 now, so you have to give him some years. Yeah. I mean, even if you look around the league, Matt Murray's just 25, and this past season was his first season just as a starter, because before he was always spending time with Fleury.
Exactly, and history, like you said, with guys like Matt Murray or Carey Price or anything. It's a consensus right now that Carter Hart's going to go back. Going to go to the AHL, play with the Phantoms for a season. I think most people are expecting the following season, the 2019-20 season, that he will split time in the NHL with whomever. I know the Flyers don't actually have a goaltender under contract for that season. They'll figure that out later, obviously. But Carter Hart would then split time. If you look at the history of guys like a Matt Murray, guys like a Carey Price, it seems when they split time, when they don't play as many games, they play like 30, 40 games in a season, their numbers stand out. Everyone is very impressed. They're at like a 9, 18,
or even if you want to look
range.
at it like a what's his name in Boston?
Tuukka
Rask. He was behind Tim Thomas for a long time. It took him a little time to be able to be how great he is now.
Yeah, it's something where I think you look at guys, when they split time, their numbers are great. But once they get to a full season workload, which really they haven't ever really experienced, a full NHL workload where they're playing 3 times a week at times. The top goaltenders in the NHL are playing upwards of 60 games in a season. It's something they've never experienced in their life. So that first season, like you just said with Matt Murray struggled a little bit this season. His numbers were down.
He also obviously had injury issues too, but he still...
And that comes with it too. Their body's not used to them playing as much. They need to get acclimated to that. And
I mean, obviously, it's a different story because Murray played so well in the 2 Stanley Cup runs at the
and we can't necessarily expect that from Carter Hart. But for Carter Hart, I think the 2019-20 season, I think it's realistic to say that he splits time.
Yeah.
And then the 2020-2021 season, he becomes a starter. But even then, I don't know if he necessarily will be at the level, even if he does hit his ceiling. I don't know if he'll be at the level to be the starting goaltender of a contender.
Like even when we had, because Bobrovsky, if we want to go back Flyers wise and everything, when he was here, when we first brought him up and everything, he wasn't really the best.
Yeah,
he was really acrobatic and everything. He made like highlight reel saves and all that, but he wasn't the goalie he is now in Columbus.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why the Flyers traded him. They saw themselves in a similar position the Flyers are in right now, where they saw Sergei Bobrovsky, or where they'll be in a couple years. I mean, the Flyers their whole team was at a point where they were ready to contend. They were ready to be a Stanley Cup contender, but in goal, they had Bobrovsky there. They had Brian Boucher, Michael Leighton, Ramry, guys like that.
Brizgalov near the end.
That's what I'm getting to. They had guys like that who were middling, kind of struggling a bit.
Yeah.
So they brought over Ilya Brizgalov. They signed Ilya Brizgalov to be their starting goaltender, a guy they thought that could be their franchise goaltender and their final piece to becoming a Stanley Cup winning team. And because of that, not immediately, but because of that, they handed the reins to him, and they traded Sergei Bobrovsky to the Columbus Blue Jackets. So something you do need to you do need to have patience with these goaltenders.
I mean, it wasn't. I mean, if you want to put it together, we got Mason back from trading away Bobrovsky, right? Or was that?
They were 2 separate trades where essentially they
got
the same returns. It was a year after the Flyers got Steve Mason.
Right.
But yeah, it's
and then obviously Brizgalov didn't really turn out to be the goalie the Flyers.
Yes, really it's something where you need to have a lot of patience, and it's. I think a lot of people are expecting Carter Hart to step in, even in the AHL this year, and dominate.
We'll get
and that's not necessarily something that's going to happen, and that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean he's going to become a bust. It's just goaltenders are weird.
You're never gonna have
take a long time.
You're not really gonna have a Fleury where he's drafted in like the first round and plays like right away.
Yeah,
that's very rarely for a goalie in the NHL to be that way.
And especially now, I mean, back then, every few years, there was a Marc-Andre Fleury drafted number 1 overall, Rick DiPietro. Obviously, that didn't work out with the New York Islanders. But those guys, those were generational talents, at least in their junior field. Carter Hart was a second-round pick.
Yeah.
So obviously, he has great skill and could very well be twice the goaltender that
and he's already in the past couple of years he's been destroying it in juniors and everything. That's what's making people more amped about him. Some of the best
numbers of any junior goalie ever, but just because he's produced that well in juniors doesn't mean that he can't struggle in professional hockey.
Exactly.
So it's something you do need to be prepared for, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
And past Carter Hart, I would have him as the number 1 just because of that high ceiling we were just talking about.
The risk is you'll take the risk for what you could possibly get.
Yeah, I mean, he very well could only be an NHL backup or something if he doesn't hit his ceiling, because goalies are weird. Maxime Alouette was a goalie for the Everett Silvertips, the same team that Carter Hart plays for. He was a Flyers prospect. Everyone thought he was going to be the next great thing, and he's played a lot in the ECHL over his career. So it's not necessarily a guarantee.
No.
After Carter Hart, guys like Morgan Frost, Philippe Myers, I think I don't know if you'd agree with me on this, but I think they're essentially 2A, 2B. They're essentially the same type of player. I put them in the same category.
Yeah.
As someone that could be maybe a top pair defenseman, maybe that elite second line center. I don't necessarily, like I said earlier, think that they're going to be number 1 defenseman, number 1 center.
But even coming up, if you want to say if Morgan Frost doesn't come up this year, but the following year, you'll still have Couturier and everything, so he'll just go into that third center spot, essentially. So that's not a terrible place to start out for him.
I think these two are guys who are, it depends on your definition of a blue chip prospect, but I think they fit the mold of a guy who has great potential, but also has a very high floor. In that I think they're both essentially guaranteed to be NHL players. Obviously it depends on where they're going to be. We don't exactly know where they're going to be in the lineup, but I think that they are essentially guarantees to at least be NHL players. They're both great prospects, and I'm ecstatic to have both of them. For Frost, obviously the Braden Shen trade brought him over. They drafted him with that first round pick, and he's great. He's got the speed.
He put up great numbers in his junior year or in juniors this past season.
Even better than Travis Konechny's draft plus 1 year. So yeah, he's a great player. He's someone who I think in the next couple of years, I don't know about this year, but the following year, I very well think he could be the number 3 center for the Flyers.
He could be.
And then Philippe Myers, I think, has an even better shot at making the team this year. I think he could do it. I think we mentioned yesterday. I think he will.
I mean, it sucks for Morin, but that kind of bumps Myers up this season because of that.
Definitely, Morin last season was at least. He was supposed to be the first injury call-up. He was supposed to be, if there's an injury...
He was supposed to be the person that made it out of camp, essentially.
Yeah, if there's an injury to someone in the Flyers top 6, we're going to send Morin up. He's going to be inserted in the lineup. We think he's ready, but there's not a lot of spots for him. I think that's Myers this season.
Yeah.
I think that's the spot he will be in.
Which then went to Sanheim being as when someone got hurt. Sanheim came up this season.
So I think that's the spot Myers will have this year. I think I would be pretty surprised if he didn't play some time in the NHL this season. I think he would have to have a disastrous year like Morin had with injuries
for him not to. Yeah,
exactly.
He'll be like a Sanheim or even a Ghost, but to come up at some point, which always seems to be around like the December, January time when that kind of happens. So if he might come up around then, but even then it might be a little later. Or
I think then we have those two grouped together. I think those two are definitely 2 and 3, whichever way you have them.
Yeah.
After that, I think there's a grouping of guys, Joel Farabee, a Jay O'Brien, a German Rubtsov, even a guy like
the Germ.
The Germ. Even guys like Wade Allison, Isaac Radcliffe, even Mikhail Vorobiev. There's a lot of guys who Obviously those players don't necessarily all have the same ceilings or floors, but they
could be good depth players.
Yeah, I think they have ceilings they're all forwards. I think they all have ceilings of good second line players. I think they all could very well become those types of guys. If I were to rank them, I think I would probably have. I think I could have Wade Allison as number 2, although the torn ACL may bump him down a little bit for me. Joel Farabee, obviously, with that first-round pick this year, he's another great prospect. So the Flyers have a lot of depth.
Yeah, they do.
So who out of those guys, who do you think? Who would you have tops? Out of Wade Allison, Isaac Ratcliffe, the Germ, Flyers 2 first-round picks this year.
Yeah, I'd probably go with you with Wade Allison, but it all kind of depends on that.
On the knee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one I'm always, because Rubtsov was a first round pick from a couple of years ago. He's always one that I want to be that one person that at some point comes up or does something, but it never really seems to be that way yet.
Ron Hextall was asked in his press conference yesterday at the end of the development camp about German Rubtsov and about his production and where they see him at the moment. And the fact that, obviously, regarding his production, that he was less than a point per game player this year, he definitely struggled. So Hextall said that, essentially, he's a great two-way player. He compared him to Sean Couturier in that he's a two-way player, not necessarily that he will get to
be like
Sean Couturier level. Right. But that he believes that Rubtsov focused more on his defense this season, and he focused more on his defense the past couple of years, and that going into the AHL, he should focus more offensively. Which
is kind of the opposite of, if you want to put it similarly, to Lawton. For the longest time, he kept wanted to be more offensive, but then when he went to the AHL his last season, that they wanted him to focus more on his defensive abilities.
Exactly.
So and it's obviously seemed to work out for him since he's played pretty well since being up this past season.
And as Ron Hextall said, these guys, if they were all perfect, they would be in the NHL. And they all have things they need to work on. And for Rubtsov at the moment, it's more of on his offensive game.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who has a lot of skill. He's got speed. So he's still someone who could put everything together. He's not necessarily a bust at the moment. No. But it's something he definitely has to work on come to the AHL. The Flyers at the moment, I can't remember the last time they had so many college prospects. They have their 2 first-round picks in Farabee and
O'Brien.
And then you also look at Wade Allison, who we mentioned. Allison, Ron Hextall said that he would have liked for Allison to have signed his entry-level contract and played for the Phantoms this upcoming season. But it sounds like he's going to go back to Western Michigan. So
Vorobiev, I'm always worried about, or could be someone too.
Yeah, he's definitely someone who, like Frost, I think he might even have a little bit better chance than Frost. Could fight for that third-line center spot. They could even put him maybe at that fourth-line center spot.
Because didn't they give him a good look last preseason?
Yeah, it was a strange situation because he was with the Flyers in the preseason. Yeah. And then when the Flyers started sending guys down to the AHL and sending guys back to juniors, Vorobiev was sent back to the AHL. And it wasn't a surprise to anyone. I don't think anyone expected him to make the team. But he played very, very well in the preseason. I think there was a game or two where he was in the AHL and there were still preseason games going on. And then it surprised everyone. They just randomly called him back up. Yeah. It's rare to see a call-up in the preseason. Especially when they still have a larger roster. They didn't finalize their roster yet. And he played in, I believe, one more preseason game, and then they sent him back to the AHL. But he's
always a guy to look out for.
Yeah, Ron Hextall's obviously very high on him. That was a big vote of confidence for him.
And if you want to look up for next season, if you want to go off that, is Aubé-Kubel. He played great last season. His only thing was his hits and the suspensions. He has to kind of tone down, but this past season he did really well, and he was always the guy people were mentioning that he could possibly even last season might
Ron
even come up.
Hextall was asked at his end-of-year press conference to name a couple guys who could potentially make the jump, and Aubé-Kubel was one of them who you mentioned could potentially make it to the NHL. I think the Flyers probably see him more as a bottom six guy. Probably next season, if he makes the team, probably a fourth liner.
He probably will be.
So
just seeing his game, it seems like it fits more for him to be a fourth liner.
Yeah, he's a more tenacious guy, but he does have a lot of skill. He produced pretty big numbers in the AHL. In the QMJHL.
Q, right?
And he was a second round pick, so he has some pedigree. And he's someone who you would want in your fourth line.
Yeah.
Because he's
at least the fourth line that's been the past couple years, it seems, in the NHL.
Yeah,
from what it was before is always the hit people, like get your energy going kind of line. It's kind of gone to more skill, and
he's someone who could play up in your lineup if need be, if there are injuries.
Yeah.
He doesn't, like you said, that big bruising fourth liner. He does not look like that. He's about 5'11". He's a smaller guy, but he is someone who will hit people. Obviously, goes over the line sometimes with his 5'11",
194.
So yeah, he's 5'11", but 194. I mean, that's NHL level size.
Yeah.
So he's in that mold, like you said, of the modern day fourth liner, someone with a lot of speed who can forecheck and has the skill to produce.
He could, if he's with Lawton and Raffles, let's say, for the fourth line, that's not a terrible fourth line to have. He could fit well there.
Yeah, it's something that they could replicate, essentially, what they had at the beginning of last year, where they had the Taylor Lear, Michael Raffle, Scott Lawton line that played so well together. Obviously, they didn't produce to the level it took a little bit, but they really did well forechecking. The puck always seemed to be in the Flyer zone, which is essentially what you really want out of your fourth line. They're not necessarily going to be putting up a lot of points. That's why they're a fourth line. That's why they're not higher up in the lineup. But you at least want them to keep the puck moving forward. You don't want them stuck in their own end.
You want them to be good forecheckers.
Exactly.
Essentially.
Not like what they used to have in Chris Van de Velde and Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, where the puck always seemed to be in their own zone.
Yeah.
So I think he is someone.
But then there's also that he has. It'd be weird to see because there's also, what's his name, Laterra still in the lineup too. So seeing how the end of last season went, he never really was on the bench ever, and he always took over the fourth line center.
It's the Dave Haxtell factor where you never really know what you're going to get there. Obviously, Yuri Laterra spent a lot of the time in the lineup. They moved Lawton to the wing at the end of the season and had Yuri as the fourth line center. But you could also look at it as the beginning of the season. Yuri played very little.
True.
So
and you also have Dale Weiss too. He's always another person that I keep forgetting is in the lineup, but he's the person that they seem fine with just keeping in the press box. He was in the press box
very consistently. He spent very little time in the NHL in the lineup last season.
Yeah.
Aubé-Kubel isn't someone who I would rank as a very high-end prospect, with a high ceiling, but he is someone who is valuable in that he, like we said, could play that modern-day fourth-line role that does provide value.
And then there's always Sandstrom, too.
Yeah.
He's another guy that people have been high on. He's playing in the Swedish Elite League, which is the third-best hockey league right now.
Yeah, third-best hockey league in the world.
He's going back this season, but
he'll be back in the Swedish Hockey League on HV71. They actually beat Oscar Lindblom in the SHL title. What was that, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So Sandstrom,
21, a little older than Hart, but
yeah, he's a year older than Carter Hart. He had a rough year last year. It was
injuries.
It was pretty much a lost year. He had injuries. Ron Hextall alluded to the fact that it was more. He called it an injury, but it was also more of like an illness that just stayed for a while. Obviously, he's fully back to health now, and it's a big year for him.
Yeah, it is.
Because last year when he played, he didn't play well. Obviously, he had the illness that was still there.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire season.
So he was never really playing 100%. So
yeah, exactly. So that's why his numbers were so mediocre for his talent level.
And at the end of last season, they signed him to his entry-level contract. So
yeah, so
to me, that means after this season, he could easily be on the Phantoms.
Yeah, I think he will. I think after this upcoming season, he will come over to North America. It's a big year for him because for as much as you want to blame the season on injuries, it's another year in his development where you're not seeing that next step that he's taking that you need to see from a prospect.
Yeah.
So
you could also say similarly to Samuel Morin too.
Yeah, exactly. Moran might be a little bit more set in terms of his age, how old he is. So he's probably
they just
what he
signed
is.
him to a 3-year deal, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a 3-year contract.
Yeah.
Close to league minimum. He's obviously the Flyers still see something in him.
Right.
But they signed at a low enough cap hit where
700. Yeah.
Yeah, getting rid of him is not really a big deal in any way. So.
But going off the goalies is because Hexall said he would think about going 3 in the AHL this upcoming season because you still have Alex Lyon and Felix Sandstrom. That's still
not Felix.
Or not
Anthony Stolarz. Yeah.
Anthony Stolarz and Alex Lyon.
Yeah, so
they're still there for the Phantoms. So he would have to split time with them and how Hexall plans on seeing that. He's said, what was it, yesterday or?
It was yesterday in the press conference. So looking at that, I don't think it's necessarily a big deal. Obviously, it might be a bit of a problem at the beginning of the year. I don't think they're really gonna. They're gonna try their best not to take any starts away from Carter Hart.
No.
He'll split time, obviously, but if getting that third guy in there, probably I assume the third guy is probably Anthony Stolarz. Getting him some starts will probably take away from Alex Lyon more so than Carter Hart. But at the end of the day, you look at the Flyers and their backup goaltender is Michael Neuvert.
That's true.
So one of those guys will be up with the Flyers for a good part of the season. So it shouldn't.
And every
really
year
be
it's always somebody different. Stolarz was hurt this past season, so it was Lyon, but the year before it was Stolarz.
Yeah. So I think. At least this is how I see it. I think Carter Hart obviously is their priority. He's going to get ice time no matter what. I think Alex Lyon is probably the number 2 there, and then Stolarz just because it sucks for Stolarz because he played well in the NHL when he played 2 years ago, but even then his numbers in the AHL were nothing spectacular. No. And he played very little in the NHL. It was a very small sample size. And with missing last year, he got passed in the depth chart, at least in my opinion, by Alex Lyon.
But even if you want to go forward-wise, I don't think either Lyon or Stolarz are someone that's far in the Flyers' future goaltending-wise. If anything, maybe a backup role.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, that's pretty much their ceiling at this point. They're getting up there in age. They're just not. Yeah. They're not guys.
Lyon 25, Stolarz 24.
Yeah, so they're not guys who are necessarily really in the Flyers' plans in the future.
Yeah.
At best, they'll be a backup, and even then, I think the Flyers would probably just end up trading them. I don't think I would be surprised if either of them was in the Flyers organization in like 2 years, 2 years. So yeah, I don't think the Flyers really are putting any priority in having them play too much, just because it's not like they're really even developing anymore. They're just kind of what they are at 24 and 25
you already know
years
what
old.
you're getting out of them.
Yeah. So you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I think after that, I think we can end that here.
All right.
For another podcast.
We will see you tomorrow.
Yeah.